Welcome back to the Mark Vines Show. This is Mark Vines, and thank you for joining us today. And we're going to continue on with our part 2 series of the history of the Democrat Party. And this is your place for the truth, freedom, open thought, and education, especially for you liberals that are out there. And we have Clint Morano joining us again today, continuing on with the history of the Democrat Party. And so, Clint, the last time we talked, you left off with how if people really understood the history of the Democrat Party, that the party would be outlawed. Now, that's a pretty strong statement. Don't know that I disagree with that, but for those that are going to get really upset about that kind of a statement, there is some basis to that, Clint. And so we had kind of the history going back into the 1800s of the party leading up until now. And but that's where we left off, Clint. And I just wanted to turn this over to you and have you continue on with that discussion from part 1.
Sure, Mark. And thanks again for inviting me on the show. I appreciate it. So you really got to go back even a little bit farther to so right at the turn of that century, the late 1700s to 1800s, and what the initial where the Democratic Party, what it grew out of, and that really it was Thomas Jefferson and the establishment of the Democratic Republican Party. That's what they were called. And they actually were called, believe it or not, they were called Republicans back then because Jefferson and his followers looked after a small R republicanism, right? Where states' rights were more important than the federal rights. And it also, it comes from that confrontation between Jefferson and Hamilton about how strong the central government should be. And so it starts like that. But Jefferson's utopia was that of an agrarian society, right? Where, these gentlemen farmers and other farmers, that's what made the world great. That's what would make America great, not the bankers and the stock traders and the industrialists that the Northeast was kind of evolving into at the time, but more along the lines of the southern state or colonies and states eventually which was an agrarian society, which was that way all the way through the Civil War, right? So Jefferson, started the confrontational seeds in our political system when he opposed Alexander Hamilton, and two parties came out of that: the Federalist Party, which aligned itself with Hamilton, and these Democratic Republican Party, which aligned itself with Jefferson. And that party kind of went along for a while until after the War of 1812. And there started to become a rift because Madison, who was a protege of Jefferson, he backed the establishment of the Second Bank of the United States, and he started implementing tariffs, and that kind of was in the face of what the strict states' rights constructionalists of the Constitution believed. And the Federalist Party collapsed after 1815, and there was an era of what they call the era of good feelings. There wasn't really two different parties, but this split grew. And in the election of 1824, John Quincy Adams became one side, and then Andrew Jackson, who lost to Adams in a very controversial election, and we could go into that, but Jackson's faction eventually coalesced in what we know today as the Democratic Party. And that's where we could really start to look at, okay, let's start talking about the things that party did. And let's start with Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, Southerner from Tennessee, had a plantation outside Nashville, very slave owner. What did he do while he was president? Well, first of all, the whole the whole driving factor for these landowners, these plantation owners, these land speculators was to continue manifest destiny, or the grabbing of land, so that, because first it was tobacco and then it was cotton, and these things exhaust the soil. So they constantly needed more land to cultivate, to grow these crops. That's what the South grew. They grew cotton, they grew indigo, they grew rice, but but those were the big things. Cotton, tobacco, and indigo were the big things and cotton, after the invention of the cotton gin, was really king cotton at that point. It was a 3-season year cash crop. But there was this constant hunger to get more land, and Jackson was part of that. So you could start with the Creek and the Indians of Georgia, right? The Cherokee and the Creek, where the Cherokee had actually assimilated into American culture at that point. They built towns, they cultivated the land, they grew cotton, they owned slaves. But Jackson saw that land and said, I want it, right? So they basically forced the Cherokee off the land. The Cherokee sued. The chief of the Cherokee sued. They won all the way to the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Marshall ruled in their favor, and Andrew Jackson said, well, let's see if you try how you can enforce that ruling, and basically marched them in the middle of winter to the Oklahoma Territory, dying along the way, called the Trail of Tears. Okay, that is a very bad thing, right? You basically stole land from people, and then you forced them on a forced march, and they died along the way. To me, that's almost like a war crime right there, and it's paramount to almost a genocidal type of activity. So once again, trying to grab land more. What's the next step along the way? Well, there was Texas, and there was once again, these Southern Democrat landholders saw Texas as an opportunity to expand more slave owning territory and more land to cultivate cotton. So what did they do? They lobbied and they pushed until finally they got themselves a war with Mexico, a fellow republic at the time, right? There was a lot of controversy in the United States about this war because there were people that saw it as wrong and unjust, but yet we had it anyways. And it was a war of expansion brought upon by the Democratic Party at the time, right? So then you started getting into all these other issues following that. You could take a look at, the attempts to try to appease, and I'm going to say appease, Southern Democrats and the slaveholding states. Your first one, you had the Compromise of 1820, also known as the Missouri Compromise, right? And that was that we are going, for every slave state that comes into the Union, we also have to have a free state. So with the Missouri Compromise, Missouri came in, and then also Maine came in to try and maintain a balance, at least within the Senate, between slave and free states. Well, and it also set a cap that, no slave states could be any higher than 3630 north. All right. So that was in 1820. Then you have to think, okay, in 1831, there was a little thing that happened called Nat Turner's revolt. I don't know if you were aware of that, but it was a slave revolt that very much terrified Southern whites, because they were greatly outnumbered as far as population goes. There was more African American slaves than there were whites in the South. So that started getting. Then I think it was, we had the war, the Mexican American War. It was around 1846, I think, to 1848. And there's another. Once again, so you had the northerner who tried to say, a Pennsylvania named Wilmot. It was called the Wilmot Proviso, who tried to ban the expansion of slavery into new territories that were going to be, that were absorbed by this Mexican, the war with Mexico. Once again, the Democrats were livid. And if you go back and look at the rhetoric of the times, it was completely, just filled with this hate mongering of, how the North is trying to destroy their society, how it's trying to ruin their economy, and, just all this rhetoric coming out of the South, building once again towards, and then in 1850, we had yet another kind of capitulation to the Democrats, and that was the compromise that allowed California into the Union as a free state in 1850. Now, what did we do as a part of the compromise? Well, a much more restrictive fugitive slave law was brought under and allowed to go through and signed into law. And then 1854, you had the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which basically threw out the initial Missouri Compromise. And now it said in 1854 that popular sovereignty is going to dictate dictate whether a state is free or slave, right? Mm-hmm. That was one of the key elements that is really going to drive us towards the Civil War, because that's where you got things like Bleeding Kansas, where you had mobs of slave, these want to try to force, basically rioters and terrorists out in Kansas, trying to put fear into people so that the state would vote for slavery. Sounds familiar, right? Then in 1857, you had Dred Scott. And if you remember the Dred Scott case, and here's the importance of the Supreme Court, because for all these years, you had Democrat presidents, either elected from the South or even Northern Democrats, who they called dough faces at the time, because even though they were from the North, they did whatever the South said, and they kept appointing Supreme Court justices. But in this case, this was actually a Supreme Court justice who had been appointed by Jackson, who ruled that Dred Scott was property, and no matter where he was, whether he was in a slave state or a free state, he was still the property of that individual, and he was still a slave. So, once again, Democratic Party keeping people in bondage and slavery, and using the supreme law of the land to do so. And then it finally accumulates into the 1860 and the Lincoln, and then this the secession and the Civil War, and we talked about that. But then you take a look at what happened after the Civil War, right? And then the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, the attempts to derail Reconstruction, and all those benefits that African Americans had in such a short time. And when you think about that pretty much any white person in 1865 was racist. I'll have to say it, just about, because they didn't know any better, right? That's what they were. Most Northerners never even saw a black person, and we know how Southerners thought about them. So you had all these preconceived notions and these ideas, and, race did play a part in people's thinking in 1865, all right? That being said, when you think about the years of Reconstruction and the passing of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and that African Americans in a very short time under the Grant administration were elected to Congress. They were appointed judges. They went from being slaves to actually being part of the American system. But unfortunately, that all got derailed by the Southern Democrats, who then brought about, as we move on, the Jim Crow laws and segregation and all of that. So there's a very brief timeline, but I think if you pull those things out and you look at those different acts, that's what kind of leads me back to that.
So what I hear a lot of Clint today is when I talk to, now I have a political science background and you have a history background, and I think the danger for people like you and I is that we assume that other people understand American history the way that you and I do, and they don't. When I talk to young people today, and in the last episode we talked about how people today, history began the year they were born. And they don't understand the deeper history and the extended history. And when I talk to young people today and I tell them, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, that he freed the slaves, that everything that you talked about, it was Democrats who opposed Jim. It was Democrats that supported Jim Crow. Republicans opposed it. All the civil rights acts would have never passed if it hadn't been the Republicans. That nearly all the rights that African Americans have today were due to the Republican Party. And people say either A, that's not true, or B, the parties have changed. They try to say, okay, well, that was back then, but today it's the exact opposite. But it's not the opposite. And in fact, today, because that's where we want to take the conversation, Clint, so how does all that history play into what is going on right now as our cities are burning down? And how is it that the Democrat Party seems to have taken that message and convinced the public that they are the party for minorities, particularly for African Americans, when in fact they're really not? What do you think of that?
Well, so you got to take a look at the late '60s, right, and the civil rights movement and the Great Society and Lyndon Johnson, and right. So Lyndon Johnson was from Texas, right? He was as Southern Democrat as it comes. And there are some very controversial things that are said about Lyndon Johnson. There was a statement that, he said that if blacks are going to vote, then I'm going to make damn sure they vote Democrat for the rest of their lives. Now there are some people that debunk that, said that he never said that because it came from a single source. But then again, there are people on the other side who debunk it, also say that he was a great person for civil rights. But that, once again, that only comes from a single source. It comes from one book. So, it's once again, it's the irony of, the hypocrisy of it. Yeah. That source doesn't fit our mantra. So we'll say it's not worth anything, but this single source, since it does, we'll go with that. So the interesting thing, so you have to look at, do you remember Strom Thurmond?
Oh yeah.
So Strom Thurmond was a hardcore Southern Democrat, Dixiecrat, segregationalist, whatever. Now this is the point where I think, the people that try and say that Republicans are racist, is at that point where Strom Thurmond switched to the Republican Party because he did not like the politics of where Lyndon Johnson was taking the Democratic Party. So him and his Dixiecrats came over to the Republican Party. So everyone said, okay, at that point, Republicans all became racist. Well, no, they didn't. Although those guys probably were, racist, that philosophy was not what came with them. What came with them was those things that Republicans tend to, and we're talking in the South, because the South flipped red, right? And the North went blue, which was a complete switch from the Civil War days. So the South flips red, and you have to say, well, why is that? Because because we're racist, because we're trying. No, it's not that at all. It's not because Republicans are racist. It's because Republicans believe in things that a lot of traditional Southern values at the time and across the United States are, religion, Second Amendment, smaller limited government. It's those things, right, that drove people in the South who used to be Democrats towards voting Republican. And it's not just white people that did that. Black people went too, because a lot of African Americans in the South also have strong religious convictions. They have they believe in the Second Amendment. They believe in all those same things, right? That's why you can have a Southerner, a senator from South Carolina, which used to be one of the most racist, segregated states in the United States, and pre-Civil War through the 1960s. We have a black senator from South Carolina. If black Republican senator. If Republicans were that big a racist, they certainly wouldn't be voting for a black man to be in the Senate. So you have to throw that. You have to throw that out. Throw that baby out with the dirty water. Yes, there was that weird little switch in there when the Dixiecrats came over, but they did not bring that mantra of racism with them. They brought with them all these other values that turned the what was the blue South red. So that's how you argue against that, where you say, now going on the flip side, what has turning northern states and big northern cities that used to be Republican blue? Well, let's look at Chicago. Let's just take a look at, in the past year, how many murders have there been in the city of Chicago caused by black on black violence?
A lot. Actually,
a lot.
You almost have to break down.
I think 200.
You talk per weekend, It could be as much as 60 plus in one weekend.
Yes, right. And look at the murder rate in New York City now is the highest it's been in a decade, if not more. Right. Look at Baltimore. Right. Look at every city in the United States, major metropolitan city, that has been dominated by the Democratic Party for the past 60 years. And what do you have? Honestly, if you look at the most liberal states in the United States, they are the most segregated if you look at New York City, right? And you look how it is broken up by population, by ethnicity, it is more segregated than pretty much anywhere else in the United States. And how can that be? The bastion of liberalism. How can it be, Mike? Or Mark, I'm sorry. Because their philosophy is not one of inclusion, and it's not about making people better. It's about keeping them where they're at so that they remain in that voting bank forever. And that's why.
And Clint, and I'm gonna say it's one other thing too. It's going to be something else that I have really given a lot of thought to recently. It's not only are Democrats about keeping people segregated in their quote unquote in their place, if you will, but the speaking out is not okay in the Democrat Party. Oh. It's not. Look at any black man or black woman that says, hey, you know what? I'm a conservative. And let's say they go out online. Let me know how we all know how that works out for them. It doesn't work very well. I have just kind of a little segue here real quick, Clint, because what made me really think about this is how my family says, don't put a Trump sign in the yard. Don't put a Trump sticker on your car. I have a Trump hat. Don't wear that hat.
Wear it. No.
And I do. But here's what happens. And I, believe it or not, I get people that will look at me. They'll give me that look, but I'm not the victim type. So I'm not real worried about being insulted by a liberal. But you get the look. But I get a lot of people that will compliment it. And I just had a woman the other day. I was in a grocery store, And I go up to the counter, and it's a little Filipino woman, and she's just looking at me, and I'm wearing a Trump hat, and I'm wearing a shirt that has that thin blue line American flag on it, the thin blue line shirt. So I'm wearing both of
Yep.
those. And the woman first starts looking at my shirt, and then she sees my hat, and then she looks back at the shirt, and she whispers to me, and she goes, well, she has a mask on, so I couldn't really understand it at first. But as it turns out, she says, "Why are you wearing that?" And she's Filipino, heavy Filipino Tagalog accent. And I looked at her and I said, "What? What did you say?" And she said, "Why are you wearing that?" And she points at my hat. And I looked at her and I'm thinking, oh, okay, here's going to be the first time I've had somebody actually say something negative to me. And I said, because I love my country and I love President Trump and I plan on voting for him. And she looks around and she puts her hand out. And I'm like, what? And what it is she wanted to fist bump me. And she fist bumps me and she goes, "Me too. I love Trump and I'm going to vote for him." She goes, "But I have to be quiet here because a lot of my coworkers don't agree, but I love your shirt and I love your hat." And it's like we're whispering. And I just thought to myself, how ridiculous is this?
Yeah.
8 years under, 8 years under Clinton and then 8 years under Obama. I saw a lot of Obama shirts and hats and stickers and things like that. And then Hillary
Yeah.
later on. And
Yeah.
Clint, I don't know about you, but I've never once did it occur to me to go up and even say anything negative towards a person that was wearing that shirt, let alone assault them or do anything that would make them afraid of me. Never.
Yeah.
But isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that the opposing party of my political views espouses inclusion? They're the people with those coexist bumper stickers. You've seen those. No peace means no peace. Those bumper stickers. And those are the people that kind of have grabbed that space, if you will, meaning that those are their taglines. They're the ones that we're about peace and inclusion and all of this kind of stuff. But yet we're afraid. I can't put my Trump hat on without wondering if I'm going to be assaulted by the same people that are proposing peace. Isn't that interesting? All these riots, Clint, how many photos have you seen or videos have you seen of people burning down the cities in the last 4 months wearing Trump hats? Have you seen any, Clint?
No, I haven't.
Not. No, I haven't. How many Confederate flags have you seen flying around, or Nazi flags have you seen flying around while these cities are burning down? I haven't seen any, but I've seen a lot of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. And it's just kind of interesting how our history, the party that has a history, as you just went through, right, very eloquently went through, the party that has a history of violence is the Democrat Party. You could even go to 1968, the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
Yeah.
Who did all that? Who was that? That was the Democrats, wasn't it? So how is it that Democrats have this reputation for violence when all of the evidence, you and I are both criminal investigators, and I look at the evidence, and the evidence says to me that it's the exact opposite of what we're being told. Do you agree with that?
I agree with you 100%. But it's the one thing, that's the one core value I think that runs through Democrats and maybe liberalism as a whole is hypocrisy. If hypocrisy can be a value, I don't know if it is, probably not, but it's one element to their mantra that is always true. They are the biggest hypocrites in the history of American politics. They absolutely say one thing, but their actions are 100% the opposite. They talk about coexistence, but yet they take to the streets and they shout down people. They threaten people. They don't allow professors to come on college campuses or speakers on college campuses who might have a different viewpoint than theirs. These are not the acts of an all-inclusive person or a party of peace. These are the acts of a totalitarian regime that wants to squash any resistance, however they can. And don't get me wrong, I have a lot of good friends who are Democrats, and I have my family history. I actually have, my sister-in-law was in the Democratic hierarchy, worked for a senator for many years, right? She's a very good person, right? But the one thing that Democrats do more so than I guess Republicans do is that they do go lockstep. right? No matter who it is that is at the head of the party right now, they all get in line and they do not deviate. And that's, I think, what makes them, strong in that way, that they, right. Where you can have, you had the Tea Party movement for a while within the Republican Party that kind of broke away. But ultimately, and except for this latest iteration of these radicals like Rashid Tlaib and AOC, right? For the most part, whatever the Democratic Party is saying, the DNC, everyone is going to follow that line, and they circle the wagons no matter what, and they don't break ranks. And I think
they get nasty
provides
too, because
resilience.
You mentioned having friends, and I, like you, I have a lot of friends that have all kinds of different views. I've always looked at politics as being a battle of ideas, right? And I can like you as a person and not agree with anything that you say politically, but they don't seem to have that ability. After all, when all of this stuff started happening several months ago, this happened to me. I can't say if it happened to you, but it probably did. That something would be posted about. Typically, it's the anti-police movement that's going on right now, and it's like if you don't agree with me, then go ahead and unfriend me right now. Speaking about Facebook, and I got a lot of those. It's like, if you don't agree with this, unfriend me. Or if you, here's another one. I had a number of things that said, if you plan on voting for Trump in November, go ahead and unfriend me now. Well, I don't know about you, Clint, but I see all kinds of crap on Facebook, kinds of crap. Never once did I respond with, well, now go ahead and unfriend me. But they have no problem. It's like, if you don't, now I may have known you since high school, and that's some of the people that they fall into that category. I've known some of these people since high school. I knew them when I was a kid, and now they're saying, but if you vote for this man, unfriend me now. Really? Now, I've known you for 35, 40 years, and today you want to unfriend me because I have a differing political view? Well, that doesn't seem all inclusive. That's not very inclusive at all.
No, it's not only that, but then I've also been subject to being insulted or saying that, how I've let people down because they thought I was much more intelligent than that to be able to, support Trump or something he said, and I'm like, I mean, you've known me all my whole life, but now all of a sudden I'm an idiot, or I'm an ignorant, or I've let you down. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. I believe in what I believe. And, and that's the funny thing. And the one thing I just don't understand, and I've yet to figure it out, is why there is so much visceral hate towards Donald Trump. I just don't get it. I mean, I'm from New York, you know that, and in New York, Donald Trump was just kind of he was like a Barnum and Bailey type character, right? Nobody really honestly took him all that serious.
Well, he was a businessman.
But he was out there promoting himself and his name because that was his business. His name was his business, pretty much. But nobody really took him seriously, right? And he got along with everybody. No one ever really. Although nobody took him seriously, no one ever really talked bad about him. Matter of fact, they always said, when you met him in person, he was a nice guy, and he was very generous and all these things, right? He has his, he was a billionaire playboy, so he went through a few wives, but that a lot of people do that nowadays. So, but as a person, nobody really had anything bad to say about him. And then he ran against Hillary Clinton, and all of a sudden he became the most evil, racist, warmongering, horrible person in the world. And remember, up until I don't know how many years ago, he was a Democrat. So,
yeah.
And all of a sudden now he's just public enemy number one. But no one has said why. What has he done? I mean,
because it's interesting. You talked about the racism part and the warmongering part, and I've thought about that. The fact is that it seems to me that not only is he not a warmonger, but he's pulling us out of a lot of places.
Yeah.
So
yes.
we have fewer troops deployed overseas today than we've had in the last decade for sure. But yet he has this reputation of being a warmonger, and he has this reputation of being a racist. When the last time I checked, he has all kinds of minorities in the administration. Judges that he's appointed. The economy was the best that it's ever been prior to COVID. The best that it's ever been for minorities. The highest, probably the most important ambassadorship that is out there, which is to Germany. Ambassador Germany was an openly gay man. He has one of his children is married to somebody who is professing converted to Judaism, and So I mean, does that sound like a racist to you?
No, and it's like I said, I mean,
Obama could have appointed an openly gay man to an ambassadorship, but he didn't.
No, he didn't.
He didn't do it. But Trump's the racist, and he's the sexist, and he's the misogynist, and he doesn't like gays.
Oh, the Obama administration killed more people via drone attacks than any administration, before or since. Matter of fact, right. The Obama administration terminated the life of a U.S. citizen with a drone strike.
Without any due process leading up.
Without any due process whatsoever. So what is that? Who's the warmonger here? I mean, I don't understand. I mean, Trump has done everything possible, like you said, to reduce our footprint overseas. Now, he has refocused us in different areas. He has refocused our attention to Russia, moving more NATO assets into Poland and the Baltic region, right? That Russians don't like that. The Polish certainly like that.
Oh, the Polish love him.
Now they're talking about moving back into the Philippines. The United States Navy extending its footprint back there where we had withdrawn from to keep China, at bay. Both those countries do not like that, right? They were very happy under the previous administration to have a blind eye turned towards them while we were out drone striking away in the Middle East and Afghanistan.
And by the way, does moving, like as you mentioned, moving into Poland and into the Baltics, does that sound like a man who's in Putin's hip pocket? Does that sound like that to you?
No, not whatsoever.
And that's why I want to implore the listeners that when you watch the news, you have to look at this as an investigator would, and remember this. This is the tagline: feelings are not facts. A lot of what you hear are feelings. Feelings are not facts. And I was reminded of that phrase again just this week when Peter Strzok went back on the circuit, and he's promoting this new book that he has. And one reporter, I was actually kind of surprised at how tough this particular reporter was on him, where this reporter asked for facts on Trump, the allegation that Trump was a puppet of Putin and he was, working with the Russians. And Strzok just came out with a diatribe of feelings. He felt this and he felt that, and he assumed this, and none of it was facts. And the problem is that feelings are not facts. You can think, like, for example, I can think that you're a horrible human being. And in fact, you could be the worst human being that I've ever seen in my life. And I had to face this as a police officer or an FBI agent. And I know you did too, Clint, where somebody would come before me and I'm talking to them. And there's no doubt in my mind that this person sitting before me has really no business walking around unsupervised, period. They're just a wrecking ball to American society. However, I'm investigating a particular crime, a particular complaint that came in. And if the evidence suggests that person did not commit this crime, then I can't go forward. I can't say, well, okay, he didn't commit this crime, but I know he commits crimes, other crimes, or he committed some other crime. That's not how that works. The way that it works is I'm investigating this crime. And what happened with Strzok was he said, his presupposition is Trump's a bad guy, therefore I have to go over with him. Okay, but you have no evidence that he did what you're alleging. Well, no, but I know he's doing all kinds of stuff. That's not how this works. And the problem is that I think that's how people look at Trump. They just think he's a bad guy. So let's just get if you think of the plethora of things that have been thrown at him, it's just, well, we're just going to keep throwing crap at him until something sticks, right? Something will stick eventually. It's kind of like a cop at night following you. If they follow you long enough, you're going to do something that will justify them pulling you over, right? But they're targeting you. And that's what's going on here with Trump.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing about Trump is, and listen, I met him. I met him once at a golf tournament that I was working. When I was doing a special detail in the FBI, and it was ever so brief. He just said hello. It was, but that was it. So I don't know him, but his personality, he punches back, and when you punch at him, he punches back. I mean, it's verbal, it's Twittered, it's whatever, but it's not like physically punching, but he hits back. So like the whole McCain thing, right? Everyone was appalled because John McCain was a war hero. Cannot take that away from him. But he threw the first punch, and then Trump came back with a big roundhouse. I'd rather have someone who doesn't get shot down as a hero. I mean, to most people, that's appalling. Like, oh my God, how can you say that about a war hero? In retrospect, now we look at how much McCain was involved in the whole, fusion, dossier, the Steele dossier and all that. And it's like, well, he might have been a war hero, but he was a flawed person. Right.
Yes, he was.
So maybe Trump saw through that and said, screw you, I'm coming back at you twice as hard. And he has a tendency to do that. And I think that might rub a lot of people the wrong way who expect their presidents to be, quote unquote, more presidential. Listen, I accept it. You're going to punch him. You can expect within an hour to 24 hours, something's going to come out of his mouth or off his thumbs. That it's going to, it's just going to come right back in your face. And you're just like, whatever, I don't really care about that. Right. And that's not enough for me to hate him, because when I look at all the things that his administration has said it would do and has done, I see that as a much bigger, achievement than maybe, sending a few insults towards some people who in retrospect probably deserved it. But, it did come from the president, but whatever. Right.
Well, but I guess when they say that he needs to be more presidential, I mean, you have to look at what's going on. I mean, he may be more abrupt, I mean, he's a New Yorker. Okay. And no offense to you, Clint, I know you're a New Yorker too, but it tends to be a more direct and abrupt way of dealing with people. And that's just the way that it is. Bush was from Texas and people made fun of how he talked, but I lived in Texas for 10 years, as you know, and in West Texas, that's just how people talk. And, New York people talk a different way. And, when people say, well, he shouldn't say these things and he shouldn't come back and hit. Well, I must remind people that really, do you blame him? That's the question I would have, because you do know that this whole impeachment thing, the whole Mueller investigation, what Strzok did, what the rest of them did, when you boil it down to its basic elements, they were accusing him of treason. That's what they were accusing him of. And then you get upset when he fights back because you're accusing him of treason, and then he's not so nice about it when he comes back at you, and then you blame him because he's not so nice. Well, what do you expect from the guy? What do you expect from him? And I'll tell you where a lot of the frustration from the American people is coming up. We're all getting a little tired of this. And these people that started this, like I watched Peter Strzok on TV the other day giving this interview. And my question is this: when the hell are these people going to pay a price for what they did? Because, they did this to the president of the United States. And I've said this and I'll say it before. American people, you better wake up, because they did that to the president of the United States, and he has the entire DOJ to defend himself. But if you or I, Clint, were in Peter Strzok's crosshairs, we would have never survived that.
I know we
didn't have
we
did not have the resources. And I'll tell you something else. If Trump had not been elected, if Hillary had been elected, we wouldn't even know that this crap was going on. And that's scary to me. That scares the hell out of me to think of what could have been had he not been elected.
You know, people say that the Barr and Trump have politicized the DOJ. You know, it was the Obama administration that politicized it was
the other way around. Yep.
Yeah. You know, there's no ands, ifs, or buts about it between Eric Holder and then I'm having a senior moment here, Mike.
Yep.
His follow on what was her name?
Not Susan, not Rice.
No, not Susan Rice. The
Attorney General. Yep.
Runway meeting with Bill Clinton. I mean, Holder is the one that initially put the target on every police officer's back.
Yeah.
And I still remember the whole incident where the police responded to that little town in Massachusetts, where they said that they got a report of a suspicious activity. It looked like they were trying to do a breaking and entering or whatever. And they respond to it. It was an African-American man. It happened to be his house, but they did, they're police officers. They're going to approach a suspect cautiously because they want to go home at night too to their wife and kids and
it was a
family,
neighbor
right?
that called. It was a
neighbor that called. So, but I still remember Obama's quote. Now remember Obama is the president of the United States. He's the head of the executive branch, the senior law enforcement person in the country, right? Commander in chief. And he says, I don't know what the facts were, but I think we can all agree that the such and such police behaved stupidly or something along those lines. But I know the first part of it was, I don't know what the facts were or all the facts were. He's a lawyer, right? Didn't he go to Harvard or something like that?
Yeah.
What lawyer starts off by saying, I don't know what all the facts are, but...
Oh, I know.
And then he goes a conclusion that basically says the police were completely wrong without knowing what all the facts are. And that started it all downhill from there. And ever since then, I can remember when I was working in New York, on the Joint Terrorism Task Force with all the NYPD detectives and detectives from, the tri-state area. And, they're coming to me like, what's going on with this guy and your Department of Justice? You're putting targets on our backs, on our friends' backs who are still in uniform on the street. And I look at him like, I know, I don't know what to say. I mean, this is, the only way you can change is through an election. And, and we did change it. And hopefully, hopefully it keeps, we can do something about, the police officers that go out there every day to do what's right. Right. But yet they're being vilified and it's instantaneous. I just find, once again, I find it ironic that, you've had these shootings and whatever, the Floyd and then the guy the other day who was going back to his car and he had a knife in it. And you look at the rap sheets that these people have and they're bad people. Now no one deserves to die or to be gunned down or whatever, but it's not like these are saints. It's not like this is just some innocent, perfect person just walking down the street and all of a sudden a bunch of police get out and they shoot him dead, right? That's horrible. That's really bad. And if that was going on in this country, we'd have some serious problems. But police are responding to individuals who have a record of doing bad things, right? And then
and by
those
the way,
people
they
don't comply. And they were doing bad things, and that's why the police showed up. And then the police get there, they don't comply with the police's instructions.
Right.
And
therefore, he was resisting arrest. And he went, and people are forgetting that he had been tased. He was resisting arrest, and he was going to the car. He was opening the car door, and he went in. And it turned out there actually was a knife in there.
Yeah.
So, but how is it that the police are the villains?
The villains.
Right.
I don't see, so let's circle all the way back around to where we started this thing. If the Democratic Party and the Democratic leadership, if Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris and all of them, Chuck Schumer, if they really cared about this country and not just themselves and trying to use people to get elected, they would come out and they would defend the police and they would tell people, obey the law, right? Yes, there are injustices in this country, and we are going to work together, both sides of the aisle, to improve things, to build generational wealth within the minority community, to foster strong family bonds where a father stays in the community and where ownership in homes and jobs and education and all those things that build stability and generational wealth that will raise these minority communities out of this subsistence level of living off the government dole, right? No one gets rich from taking welfare or any other benefits from the federal government, right? You get rich by improving your lot in life over generations. It's like I didn't go. No one in my father didn't go to college. He barely. I don't even think he graduated high school. Right. My grandfather was a coal miner who came from Italy, died from black lung. But with each successive generation, right, we get better. Why? Because we had those opportunities. My father was with me from the day I was born till the day he died, right? He worked hard every single day so that I could go to college, right? So that I could go into the Navy and then go into the FBI. And then I did the same thing for my children. And they already have master's degrees, the two of them, way before I ever did, right? I can only imagine what my grandchildren will be if they continue this arc. That's the type of thing that the government, if it wants to help minorities, populations, they need to put them on that same type of path. Not just minorities. There are a lot of poor white people in this country too, Mike, that are trapped within the handout of America. You go to some of these poor Appalachian towns and not too far from where I'm at here in Virginia, West Virginia, rural Tennessee, whatever. These people are destitute and they've been trapped in that forever.
Oh yeah.
They need a helping hand to get them on a path of improvement, not a handout that keeps them where they're at.
No. The best assurance for your future is you. And I'll tell you something, Clint, and we'll wrap up on this, because I think that's the message that everybody needs to hear, is everybody needs to stop thinking like they're a victim. And if you want to get out from wherever you are, if you are not happy, then you and you alone are going to make that future, and you're going to make that destiny. And you have to stop thinking that the problem is the white man, the history of this country, systemic racism, in the police. Okay? You have to stop thinking that way and think, what am I going to do to improve myself today? What am I going to do to improve my family? And the best way to not be shot by the police is not to assault the police and to comply with instructions. Because in each one of these cases, I'm talking about the recent cases. I'm not talking about George Floyd. That was a crime. There was a crime that occurred. But the man in Kenosha, the recent event that we just had, that is not at all in the same universe as George Floyd at all. That man was resisting arrest. He'd been tased, and he did have a weapon. And by the way, it's interesting to see that Kamala Harris went and praised the family and talked about him in a positive light, when the fact is that the man was abusive to his girlfriend, had said multiple times sexually assaulted this woman, who called the police, by the way, and in at least one instance, assaulted her in front of a child. And so it's just crazy. And but we need to do better. And folks, we did what we wanted to do today. Clint and I both, is just give you a bit of a history lesson because nobody's getting that anymore, and you need to understand where we are at. So, Clint, I want to thank you for coming in today and talking about this and giving us this history lesson. And so thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So once again, this is Mark Vines, The Mark Vines Show, and visit us on our Facebook site and give us a like, give us a follow, give us a listen. Pass this podcast off to everybody you know, especially to liberals, because it will make them just their heads explode. It just will. And that might not be a bad thing, but it might, maybe we can save a few of them. You know, I look at this as like throwing starfish back into the ocean. We can't save them all, but we might save a few of them. So this is, Clint, you know, this is kind of like the ministry, if you think about it. We are out to minister to liberals and save not necessarily their souls, because that's for God to do, but we're going to save their minds. But most importantly, Clint, we are on a mission to save this country. So thanks again, folks, and we will see you soon.